Good day. Welcome to the Cory Morgan Show. Appreciate you all tuning in today. Lots to cover, lots of things going on. I even got Dave checking in again. It's been forever since that guy's been on. He's been hiding out down in Arizona. I got a good guest coming on, Mike Meilleur. You might know him as Mike from Freedom Honey if you're familiar with things on social media out that way and on X. He's got a podcast. He works with veterans groups. He is a veteran. He's been a long time with the Canadian Forces. And we want to talk about some things. I mean, the federal government's actually been talking about perhaps investing more money in the armed forces, but money alone doesn't necessarily fix things. I'm going to talk about that in my monologue in a moment. So what has to be done though to reinvest and do things right by Canada's military? That's the bigger question. So for those of you tuning in live, I appreciate that. Use that comment scroll. I see Doug, Mr. Stanley, Bruce all talking already in the comment scroll. Send questions my way, discuss things back and forth with each other. That's the great thing, the fun of being live. Just make sure to stay civil with each other. I don't necessarily read them all out, but I see them all and I appreciate it. It lets me know there's somebody on the other end of this camera, and the discourse can really add to the show actually at times, though I, again, don't necessarily read them all. So I got a bit of a long monologue today, but it's from a column I wrote last weekend, and it really has brought up a lot of questions. People really want to talk about this, even though nobody seems to have the courage to talk about it. And it says the only sacred cow that terrifies politicians more than Canada's vaunted healthcare system is the catastrophic Indigenous affairs system. I mean, to try and address problems with Indigenous peoples in Canada with any plan aside from throwing money at it and offering intergenerational apologies is to invite accusations of racism and garner political ostracization. If politicians can't find the courage to state the obvious when it comes to the mess with Indigenous citizens, then maybe it's time for media members to start this ball rolling. The taboo with this issue must, and if we are ever to dream of seeing improvements, we have to drop that taboo. I've worked in energy exploration for more than 20 years. Much of my time was spent working on or near Indian reserves and working directly with the citizens on them, watching the condition on those reserves going from bad to worse every year. It was one of the most heart-wrenching and frustrating things I've lived through. There's lots of fantastic people living in those reserves, but they're living in abject poverty and misery, and no amount of money is going to change that. I mean, how stupid can we be, really? How can we possibly think that we could separate a segment of the population based on race, constantly tell them every problem in their life is due to the malignant action of settlers of prior generations, shower them with money, and expect them to become well-adjusted citizens in the modern world? The legal term for these racial enclaves is Indian reserves. That's why I use the term. It's an old, out-of-date term, but that says a lot about what it is, isn't it? The proper term should be apartheid. It's racial segregation, and that's no better than what we used to decry in South Africa. And it won't create racial unity or prosperity any more effectively than the South African model did either. You can't fix the ills created by race-based policies by implementing more race-based policies, yet we keep trying. We need to take a results-based approach with Canada's reserves. Spending on Indigenous affairs, it's been growing in leaps and bounds, yet the situation continues to get worse by every measure. Isn't it time to admit we can't spend ourselves out of this problem yet? The 2024 federal budget, it's a massive free spending endeavor. And despite this, activists immediately condemned it for underfunding Indigenous people. Underfunding, really? Currently, just in federal spending alone, more than $15,000 a year is dedicated for every man, woman, and child of Indigenous descent in Canada. They also get loan guarantees, grants, tax exemptions, free post-secondary education. That's all on top of that. Then the provinces spend billions on top of that, and municipalities with countless programs and grants. This is above and beyond every service granted to them as Canadian citizens. They still also, of course, get healthcare, education, use roads, get full access to all those tax-funded services, as they should. But in theory, this should make Indigenous people the richest, most well-adjusted people in Canada, shouldn't it? Well, instead, they suffer with poverty, lower life expectations, high crime, low education levels, high domestic abuse statistics, massive addiction issues, mental health challenges, suicides. They lag average Canadians in every measure of standard of living. Yet some folks, some idiots, still think we can spend our way out of this. If every Canadian had just spent one day on the average Indian reserve, the national attitude on this system would change in a hurry. How could somebody go out and spend a day looking at the piles of trash, the dilapidated houses, the wild dogs, and worst of all, the broken state of the citizens and residents, and imagine for a second that this system can work? People need to ask themselves, what's the long game? Most reserves are in isolated areas with few economic opportunities. The populations are doomed to lifetimes of dependency, which leads to depression and social breakdowns. The reserves aren't going to become hubs of technological advancement or educational institutions. They're not going to become manufacturing centers or tourist destinations. They're just going to keep growing in population and dependency while disorder and misery spreads. The main employer on most reserves is almost always the government, whether federal or provincial or band administration jobs, and nepotism is rampant among these jobs. Many of them are high-paying but token roles. I worked on one reserve in northern Alberta where the person assigned to manage the band's land affairs was the chief's sister, and she didn't even know where the boundaries of the reserve were until I showed her on a map. Band managers are usually non-Indigenous members brought in at great expense to take care of the actual management of the reserve. The local members, unfortunately, are usually too dysfunctional a condition to take on that role. I'm not shooting at the Indigenous people as a race, though I doubtless am going to be accused of that. Look, any race kept on reserves as Canada's Indigenous people will be just as messed up after a few generations. It's not the race that's the problem, it's the system and the entrenched attitudes towards the issue. Look at the endless debate over clean water and Indigenous reserves. Every government with every party gets hammered on that issue. Don't you think one would invest in getting clean water by now? Actually, they did, and they have, and they do. It's just that their efforts are failing. Bringing water and septic services to rural areas is no small task. In urban centers, you get plants for treating fresh water and disposing of sewage, and it's all connected with pipes for the water and effluent. It doesn't work well in areas where the houses are separated by hundreds of meters, if not miles. In rural areas and reserves, people have their own water wells outside of reserves and septic systems. Homeowners have to maintain those systems, or they're going to fail. The problem on reserves is citizens don't hold a sense of responsibility. They don't have property rights, and they're just, unfortunately, socially dysfunctional. The systems then aren't maintained, and the water becomes contaminated. I don't doubt somebody will accuse me of racism for saying it, but too damn bad. I challenge them to prove me wrong. I'm not saying that people are dysfunctional because of their race. I'm saying they're dysfunctional because the system is breaking them. Until people are willing to point that out, though, it's not going to get any better. If Canada's Indigenous people were living in luxury and happy, I might grumble about the expenditures of taxes, but I can at least accept it. When we spend this much on the issue, though, and they're living in misery, I have to call it out. I don't hate Indigenous people. If I did, I can't think of something more cruel than supporting the current system. The reserve, the system is doomed to failure by its very nature. It won't be easy to end the system, and it's going to take some time, but it has to end eventually. The roadmap and plan to end the policies of racial apartheid in Canada need to be developed. To do that, though, we first need to accept that the reserve system is irreparably broken. To get there, we need to start talking frankly on the issue. We aren't even close to that part yet. Enough with the policies of good intent. We need policies with good outcomes. The best outcome we could see is the end of the Indian Reserve System in Canada. And that's what I got to say on that. That's all I got to say about that. Let's get on to see what Dave's got to say about other things. There's a lot going on and breaking out in the news there, and he hasn't been on forever. So this is our news editor, Dave Naylor. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
Hey, it's going good, Cory. You're sort of hinting that I don't deserve to go on holiday.
Well, you deserve it, but, we miss you. It leaves a big hole in my show. I mean, and others have valiantly filled that gap on your behalf, but it's just not quite the same.
Yeah, Jen did a good job last week. I'm a bit worried now my Arizona tan is fading, though, Cory. I gotta get back there.
Yeah, well, the sun's shining out there. It's just that you got to keep warm while you sit under it.
Yeah, that's true. Hey, I know you're a big fan of dogs, right? And you've got a couple of your own, and including Duke the Wonder Dog, who we've talked about regularly. So what the heck happened to you on the weekend to become a dog bite victim?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's funny. Yes, well, Jane and I, as you know, we have rescue dogs, and we've volunteered for some rescue places now and then. There was a posting of some abandoned puppies in a nearby area. So we kind of whipped out. It was getting towards dark soon, so we wanted to find these puppies before it got too dark to find them. And we didn't find them, unfortunately, though we got out there with a kennel. But there were other dogs in the area, and one was very rambunctious, and the little son of a bitch bit me in the ankle. Ingrates for my efforts, though no permanent damage, just a tender ankle. Unfortunately, we didn't find the puppies. Hopefully, they fared well, or they'll turn up.
Yeah, let's hope. What kind of dog was it that bit you?
He was like a husky.
Oh, yeah. So those can do some damage. You're lucky it was just sounds like a nip.
Yeah, no, he could have done worse. No, just enough to make me curse and jump away and, whine about it on social media, as is my nature.
There you go. Anyways, let's get to the news. As you say, lots of news breaking today. We're leading off with always a fun story every year, are the best baby names in Alberta, the most common baby names. And once again, it's Olivia and Noah are the top names for boys and girls. I think that's about the 200th year in a row that those two have been at the top, but there's lots of other funny names and cute names that you can go in there and read Jonathan Bradley's story out of Edmonton this morning. We've got a new Angus Reid poll talking about the Liberals' budget and how the fact across Canada nobody really likes it, and they're not getting the bump in popularity that they had hoped for. Everybody's favorite Prime Minister, Trudeau, was in Saskatchewan yesterday talking about the carbon tax. As you know, Cory, since January 1st, Saskatchewan has refused to give Ottawa the carbon tax. So Trudeau warned that the CRA, the tax man, will get him at the end, and we all know about that. The little satellite community out of Vancouver, White Rock, that little quiet town by the ocean near the U.S. border, has been rocked with the third incident of violence in the last several weeks. We had a murder there last night. Guy stabbed to death on the pier. Comes after another stabbing on Sunday at the pier. Now RCMP are investigating whether those two stabbings are related. And you'll remember the viral video that went out in February of the machine gun attack. A guy opened fire with what looks like a machine gun on a vehicle. So Surrey's getting a little bit of a dangerous place to be these days. And our Dave Makachuk has an interesting column today. British Prime Minister Sunak was over in Poland yesterday and unveiled a massive new spending plan on defense. Gave a very Churchillian speech where he basically said Europe should be on a war footing with Russia right now. And our military expert, Dave Makachuk, looks at how Canada is withering on the vine when it comes to defense spending, which I guess sort of goes with your guest you've got today, Cory.
Yeah, we'll be expanding on that for sure with Mike. He'll know much more on it. Yeah, glad Dave chummed the waters for it. Just on that name thing that comes out every year, I think last year there wasn't a single Karen on there. Is there any Karens this year?
That's a good question. I know Jonathan specifically mentioned this morning that he was going to look, but I don't know. The answer may be in the story, but I don't know off the top of my head.
It's just funny how trends can, take a name out of use. I've got, I got an ex named Karen or whatnot. It was a very common name, and now that nobody's getting named that, I mean, I can understand why Adolf's no longer in the mix, but you'd think social media memes would just be a temporary thing with popular names.
Yeah, I thought this morning Taylor was going to be the new big one with the popularity of Taylor Swift, but that didn't quite make the top. That's for sure.
Well, there's always next year. All right, Dave. Well, thank you for checking in. I'll let you get back to the news there and see about working on your tan by the window with that seat you got there.
Well, I got the big spotlight here. Maybe that'll do some good.
Right on. Thanks.
Thanks, Roy.
As our news editor, Dave Naylor. This is when I like to remind everybody we pay the bills through subscriptions and we appreciate it. So, hey, if you haven't subscribed yet, get on there, guys. westernstandard.news/membership. And it's $10 a month, $100 for a year, just like a newspaper subscription. It allows Nico and Dave and Jen and Makachuk and all the rest of those guys in the office there to keep doing this and paying our bills, and allows me to come in every week. If you subscribed already, thank you very much. If you haven't yet, support independent media, and you can do it. I want to talk about a couple of these comments. I see Mr. Stanley has been saying, okay, on some of the wordplay, which is fair, he says First Nations, and then the term Indigenous. I know that's one of the areas where the terminology and the language is constantly changing. One of the areas I'm going to get a bunch of crap over, or I have already, is because I use the term Indian reserves. But if you look in the legislation, you look at the Indian Act, Indian reserves is the term for it. And you know what? Fair enough. Over history, I don't mind changing some names if they're found to be inappropriate. I mean, the people in Canada and in the North America were named Indians because they thought they'd found India. And of course, it's clearly not related to India at all. Okay, we can evolve past that and come up with something else. But I know every year it's something else. It's First Nations, First Peoples, Indigenous. Indigenous is kind of the big one these days. So I'm using it. I understand technically it might not be the most appropriate. Don't worry, give it another couple of years and we're supposed to call them everything else, because we don't work on just becoming citizens or Canadians or neighbors or friends. It's identity politics, folks. And we've just got to keep adding something to it to make ourselves look different, I guess. Woods Dispensary says, I believe the time will come when Canadians will be forced to choose between universal health care and continuing to pay the treaty obligations. I just, to sidetrack on that a little bit, you should read a treaty. Check it out. I actually, because somebody else accused me of not reading them online recently. They accused me of all sorts of things online, but that's fine. I heard that. But it gave me a good segue. If you go to corymorgan.com, look up treaties, because I took like 15 of the treaties, and I listed them all on my own website at corymorgan.com and broke down all the contents within them, because most people haven't read the treaties. And these things that we think are treaty obligations are not. There aren't those tax exemptions. There aren't all those programs. Treaties are actually very simple documents. For the most part, they're delineating where the boundaries of the reserve are. And perhaps, and one of the things that's quite often in it is an obligation to provide education. Well, we know where that led to. The irony of it all was the residential school system was actually a bit of that basis was on treaty agreements, because the First Nations people who signed those wanted to make sure their children got educated, though perhaps that wasn't exactly what they had in mind. But the treaties aren't what people think they are. A lot of the stuff that's packed in, a lot of the problematic areas and troublesome spots are actually in the Indian Act. And again, when people think we can't change anything because it's a treaty. Well, there's a few things. The people who signed that was hundreds of years ago. I don't care. It's time to get on with modern living. Sometimes we just let some older agreements at least evolve. The other thing is the Indian Act is where the problem is, not the treaties. And the Indian Act is just legislation, guys. Legislation can be repealed. We can't do it overnight. It's not that easy. You can't just take people and rip them off reserves, of course not, or take away the way the systems work. But we've got to start working towards it, because it's not working right now. Anybody who says it's working is lying. They are lying through their teeth, or at least they're very, very seriously deluded. It's not working. Go for a drive. Check out a reserve if you like. Watch out for the dogs. All right. Let's get on to military, a nice, softer, easy subject. Our guest is here, and it's Mike Meilleur.
No, it's Meilleur. You keep messing that up every time.
Meilleur. Well, it's that French thing. Come on, I'm an Albertan, man.
You're not perfect. I'm not really here to see you anyway. I just came to see Nico.
Well, yeah, he's a better person to see. You can always see me online bitching and cursing.
I've accepted this at this point. Everybody, hi, I'm Mike from Freedom Honey. That sweet taste of freedom.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess Cory's nice enough to invite me on the show. We're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the bull, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I want to stick a little bit on the, somewhat serious end on this, because it is serious business. I mean, you're a lot of fun on the social media and on your podcast and the other things you do, and we'll talk about that after. But I do want to talk, because I need to speak to an experienced voice. This is outside of my experience, and that is the military, the Canadian Armed Forces, where it's sitting. I mean, something that happened in this budget, it may not be enough, it might be too late, it might be misguided, but they are actually talking at least about reinvesting, because they're acknowledging that it's been underfunded and not being taken seriously enough. But as I just spoke about my monologue, money alone doesn't fix problems. So maybe start in the dream world. If you had an extra couple $2 billion and you had the opportunity to start working and fixing the armed forces with that budget, where would you start?
I think the big thing is that people need to realize is we've been underfunded for decades. It hasn't been just this government.
No, can't just blame it on Justin. I mean,
it's been previous governments before and before and before. The thing is, guys, the state is not as good as it should be. And it's not just the aging equipment. It's not just the hardware, the broken planes, and throwing money at the situation. It's the whole culture needs to get a shakeup. We lost so many of the seasoned Afghan fighters, the real true heroes of this nation, kind of around that 2015, 2016, as we referred to as the big purge. And all those lessons learned kind of went out the window. And now, sadly, is that we're now moving, the wrong things are being pressed upon. The money should be going towards training, should be going to outfitting. None of this will find the best deal, the best budget. No, you got to get these guys the best equipment that they need to be able to get the job done. And the big shocker is, quite frankly, and this is my opinion, take it for what it is, they need a massive purge of the higher ranks. People that have capitulated to this woke ideology that's now festering within the military, and it's making it unappealing for new people to join. When I got in, it was, we were in the middle of the war. I would see on the newspapers every time someone died, he was treated like a hero. Don Cherry would talk about him on Friday nights, and it was great. And it made you feel patriotic. It made you want to serve. Now, I mean, we're talking tampon dispensers in the men room and rainbow sidewalks painted on bases, and they need to get rid of that. They got to bring back the toxic masculinity, and they got to make people proud again to wear the uniform, to fly the flag, and start at that ground level, and then everything else will come with time. Once we get the numbers we need, then we start, then we can get the equipment, better training, From there, it's the whole culture needs a big shakeup.
Yeah, well, it's a job like no other. And I mean, morale is everything. I mean, if you're taking somebody in every other trade or job in the world, if something is deemed as dangerous, the first thing you do is stop. We can't put the people into that dangerous situation. We won't do it. The military is different. This we know inherently we're asking people to put themselves at risk. They want to mitigate it. They want to minimize it, but you're asking a lot of people above and beyond what normally is done. And money doesn't inspire people to put themselves at that kind of risk. As a sense of purpose and morale is what does that.
Exactly. And that's where we're lacking. You're talking about, there used to be a time where it was joining was a huge badge of honor. You know, my parents were proud of me. My friends were. I wanted to go and I wanted to do the best. I wanted to be challenged. I didn't want it to be easy. I wanted it to be hard. I wanted to prove that I was worth it. The guys that were training me, these guys had combat experience. These guys had spent time overseas, and you wanted to do everything you could to impress them, to make them feel like you're part of the team and you deserve to be there. Sadly, I mean, these guys were heroes. One of my good bosses, I mean, he was one of the only 4 people in my branch since World War II to get a Medal of Valor. And I mean, anything he said, it was, yes, let's get this done. And so I don't think we're at the point where money can fix it. I think it will help. I think better equipment would help. I think it's the culture needs to get shocked. So I'm going to say this quite boldly and quite frankly. You need to rip the tampon dispensers out. You got to paint over the rainbow sidewalks on bases, and you got to bring back sweet, sweet toxic masculinity, so that we can inspire a new generation of people to join, and not just looking at it as a pension and a paycheck.
Yeah, well, I mean, toxic masculinity, it's an attitude. It can apply to a female serving member.
Absolutely.
I mean, just that toughness, that brand. I mean, you're just not going to get some woke, limp-wristed approach in a difficult, dangerous situation is not going to work out. And it's not like other jobs. They're trying to apply, I think, standards that perhaps work in an Ottawa office building to people who are expected to serve in the field in a unique situation. Exactly.
You want the tough, you want the lean, mean fighting machine. You want guys and girls that will push themselves to the end. And that's where, as a society, that's what we respected. That's why, when we used to do Freedom of the City parades, you'd get people coming down from offices and cheering on the streets. When guys were coming home from overseas missions, there were people lining the roads. That's gone. I think that level of patriotism's gone. We need to get that back. We demand a lot of our troops, and we reciprocate that by giving them ample funding and ample support.
So do we need to rethink the mandate of the military a little bit too? I mean, there's different nations have different needs and uses. I mean, we're not a large enough or at least well enough populated country to think of having a massive defensive force. We're certainly not expansionists, so we're not looking to go and take territory somewhere else. Most of, I imagine, what we do tends to be peacekeeping services or involvement in conflicts such as that, or with the allied groups when there's a conflict. Does that need to be more clearly defined, though?
The big push right now would be the Arctic.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, with the polar ice caps melting and the Arctic opening up to exploration and everything like that, we need to focus up there. So a lot of our training, a lot of our equipment needs to start getting tailored towards the Arctic. I mean, we're protected by the South, by the Americans, and we've got 2 oceans on either side. But the Arctic is right now, that's where we're most vulnerable as a country. And that's where we really need to push toward building infrastructure up there, getting proper icebreakers, and even just being able to train our troops that, hey, if anything's going to happen, you're going up north.
Yeah, well, I worked 4 winters in the Beaufort Sea area on oil exploration, dark, miserable, cold winters. It's an unforgiving, nasty, specialized climate. We used to joke about it because we were doing seismic out on the ocean, on the ice. And one of these times we're going to punch a hole and set our charges, and we're going to nail a Russian sub or a Chinese sub, because the nuclear subs are under there. They're there now, and we can't even access it because we don't have the equipment to do so. I mean, we can't pretend it's not already happening, and we're not in the game.
Yeah, Russia's up there, and everybody knows China's pushing further towards the Arctic. And I mean, if it's one of those things where if we don't use it, we lose it.
Well, there was a report out recently from the RCMP. They talked about, actually, they're saying that there's going to be civil discord coming on 2 fronts. One that didn't get reported on as much. Like, one was saying that as people are getting more and more broke and realizing that this country's not serving them well, we're going to see more protests, civil discord, and things like that. But they also talked about the Arctic vulnerability because, I mean, we're fighting over Hans Island with Denmark, for crying out loud, a chunk of rock out in the Arctic. I mean, that's a symbolic game going on. But there's a very real threat to our sovereignty up there. I mean, if Russia came along and just said, you know what, we're taking those northern islands because you guys can't even get to them. You aren't using them for anything. What is your possible claim to sovereignty on these islands when you can't even reach them? And I think they kind of got a valid point. Like, this is abandoned land. It's not Canadian land. We got to get our butts in gear lest we end up in a conflict like that that's going to disenchant Canadians from coast to coast and embarrass us.
Yeah, basically. And you're right. It's going to be, like I said, the next our big push is going to have to be further up north and to go with the training and go with the equipment and go with the manpower to deal with that. And now it's not going to be cheap. Not going to be cheap at all. Problem is when it takes you a decade to make a boat, when you got 4 or 5 different contractors bidding on jobs and you have to go through the procurement process, and then you have to then go to the ground level and do more Arctic training, and then you got to get equipment up there. So this isn't going to happen overnight. This isn't a 5-year fix. This is probably closer to a 25-year fix.
Yeah, well, and Canada is far from unique with it. Military procurement is notorious everywhere for, unfortunately, either inefficient or bad dealings. I mean, we spent time, World War II circa sidearms that were on our military forces until just a couple of years ago. And it took endless studies, endless bills, endless constant efforts, when really somebody with a budget could have gone to Cabela's and filled that need 10 years ago with about half an hour of effort.
Yeah, we had a bit of a step up during Afghanistan when we were starting to see that we were desperately short on equipment and the proper equipment. That's when the black credit cards came out, and it was like, you know what, guys, buy what you need because it's about saving lives at this point. So, I mean, we almost need that mentality to expedite this. Obviously, go through the proper channels and everything like that, but this is like I said, it's going to be a culture war. It's going to be a procurement war. And then eventually it's going to lead to hopefully being able to rebuild our tattered forces. And the only thing I can say is it's going to come down to inspiring people to join.
Yeah, there is and that was addressed in the budget and by some others, and there's a shortage. I mean, they're putting out the word and calling for recruits. People aren't signing up, or the ones that are, often perhaps they're ones that would have washed out previous, but, well, gee, we got voids to fill. We're going to hire anybody and everybody right now.
Well, now they've expanded it to permanent residents, and they came out with a news report recently that said, 30,000 applied and only 100 got through the basic training because of the security clearance. And Australia is now doing the same thing. So I'm not saying that these people, they're not patriotic and stuff like that. I'm just saying that without proper background checks and stuff like that, I mean, you really don't know if Timmy Taliban is now joining our Canadian Armed Forces.
Yeah, it's a secure, very important thing. I mean, if we've got services being done in one of the hotspots, the Middle East or Ukraine area or things like that, and if there's somebody entrenched in there who's actually sharing information to somebody we don't like, I mean, it is incredibly dangerous. The first way to reduce that sort of espionage is to make sure you're recruiting from home.
Absolutely. It used to be the predominantly major group of recruits were rural white male. Well, now with the new doctrine, they're getting away from that. Talk to any recruiter, they'll tell you they want diversity, they want more women. They're getting, if you're a white rural male, they quite frankly don't want you at this point.
Yeah, which is ridiculous. We just want, I mean, it's like every area. Again, you want the best for the job. If it turns out to be a woman, it turns out to be a Hispanic person, it turns out to be a man, it doesn't, or a white man, it doesn't matter. You want, particularly in a dangerous situation.
No, you want to go back to meritocracy. You want the best person for the job, if it doesn't matter what they are. But that sadly is starting to go the other way.
We're taking Ottawa bureaucratic rules and applying them to a military, which unfortunately is going to lead to some people getting very seriously injured.
No, this is why the Army needs a massive enema, and just to clear out I would call it the liberal agenda, and focus on the soldier agenda. They need to focus more on creating war fighters and creating professionals, bring back patriotism, and reminding people that we're not here to serve the government in power. We're here to serve Canadians, protect our territory, defend our borders, and the interest of the people.
So presumably we're going to have a different government within a couple of years. It looks that way. We'll see when it gets here. I guess, though, the thing is that to make sure it's a priority, this is kind of the call to action to the viewers, to the people too. This is the time to nag your members of parliament or potential members of parliament, like, get this on the agenda, change the leadership of the military. If we're going to fix this up, let's do it right. That's what I want to start talking about with this.
Yeah.
It's not like the government's willing to throw money at it, but okay, fine. But there's more to it than the money. And we need to be careful and planned when we do this to make a better service for the Canadians and for the people serving within it.
Yeah, we have to focus more on how would I say it? You would have to focus 100% more on promoting people based on merit and not just how many identity boxes they fill.
Yeah.
That's one issue we're having. A lot of them too. How can I say? They're losing their grip on motivating the troops properly. When we were motivated based on experience. We looked at the higher ups. We looked at that, and they were all doers. They all did something. They completed tasks and missions, and a lot of them had combat experience, and these were the guys we looked up to. Now, promotions are based on how many boxes you fill.
Well, that's unfortunate. Well, I mean, going farther down the line, then working on those things. What you work with, you're finished with your time with the tenure with the military, but it's also something that would affect the morale of currently serving ones. Is seeing the treatment of the veterans who have been through the military, and that's been a challenge for a long time. Again, Prime Minister Trudeau, that was one of his first biggest flub ups was telling a veteran, you're asking for more than we're willing to give.
Oh yeah, they'll empty the piggy bank for everything else, but the second us vets need something, it's we got to be fiscally conservative all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And how many troops were offered made? We have another one of our fellow podcasters is coming up with another story of currently serving members being offered made instead of the help they needed. We're at a point now where that story goes across the ranks and just demoralizes people even more. We've got stories of vets living in their cars. We've got other guys that have to go to the food bank. I mean, you don't think these stories affect morale? 100%. You're asking yourself, you know what? I'm willing to step up and do a very difficult job. And, be called on, and it's hard on the family. It's hard on my kids. It's hard on spouses. And now we're going from that to have to push and, how would I say it? We're weakening, we're like diluting the pool.
And veterans need a different post-career, depends on person by person, but they get unique challenges. PTSD is real. We've known that for a long time. It used to be called shell shock, and we would just take the veterans and stick them in a mental facility and leave them there. We're getting better, but still not. This is a career that comes with so much extra need quite often for people if they've been put in bad situations during their tenure. And often it's just, okay, thanks for your service. See you later. You'll get your pension. But there's some very troubled people out there.
Yeah, and that's why, can I plug the network? Are we going to plug the network? Let's plug the network, everybody. All right. So Veterans for Freedom, the organization, we've come together with a bunch of content creators, myself, Mark Minke from the Operation Tango Romeo, Trauma Recovery Podcast, Dave Morrow, Hard to Kill Podcast, and Jeff Evely's got a daily show to basically build culture. One thing that we see with vets when they get out is they kind of lose that community feeling. So together we're creating a whole bunch of shows. We're going to put it on. It's going to be on Rumble, YouTube, the other socials, including my show, the Freedom Honey Podcast, basically to remind you guys you're not crazy. And to give you a sense of community and basically rebuild those bridges that you may have lost. And we're pretty excited. June 15th is our big kickoff. We're doing a big event in Red Deer with help from Theo Fleury's organizations, Canadians for Truth. Tickets are on sale on Eventbrite. I'm putting that on there. And it's going to be a good way just to network, meet a bunch of like-minded people, and help us build this strong community for everything from helping people, helping vets, helping charity groups. It's all really, really good stuff. And I'm honored to be part of this group to help make those positive changes.
Great. Because
that's one culture where we're seriously lacking. We need to rebuild patriotism in this country and to have more, people can't be afraid to start flying the flag anymore.
No, governments don't do jobs well. So if there's a need, it's better to have grassroots people on the ground, form that network, get out there and just, as you said, have that sense of community. Finally, before I let you go, then just on yourself, you mentioned Freedom Honey a couple of times. You're another fellow beekeeper. It's just a small program, but it's a cool one.
I think it's therapeutic. They've done research that says the buzzing of the bees helps, trigger neurons in the brains and helps help with PTSD. So we have no issues getting some of my Army buddies. We put them in the zoo. We get them out at the A period. We hang out, drink cheap beer, and just talk. And I mean, like I said, I'm a veteran / beekeeper, amateur beekeeper. And if you guys want to check us out online, I mean, we got some hilarious videos of us getting stung because we learned the hard way. And you know what? It's a really cool community of a lot of caring people. And I mean, I've reached out to Cory and I've asked for help and stuff like that. And it reciprocates. So it's cool.
Oh, it's a fun initiative. All right. Well, thank you for coming in to talk today. I mean, there's so much to cover, but I'm just saying, if they're getting ready to throw the money out, we should start some of that discussion just to make sure that hopefully that some of the right changes are getting made. People need to start.
They got to put the money in the right place, but at the same time, they got to focus on building a stronger culture.
Absolutely. All right.
All right.
Good
Thanks.
to see you, Mike.
Thank you.
We'll see you again soon.
I will take off.
Oh, you're mic'd up, Mike. There we go. And again, that's Mike. I'm not even going to pronounce his last name. But Meilleur. Okay, fine. Yes, and from Freedom Honey. So keep an eye on things. Follow Mike's channels. And yes, you'll see, I see Binks is asking about the link. Yeah, look up Freedom Honey. He'll be promoting it hard for all that and the initiatives that are getting going. That's one of those areas, the government is bloated. It's huge. The American government's bad for it. Governments all around the world are bad for it. They got their militaries. They're huge bureaucratic organizations, yet very specialized. And they're asking people to go into very unusual circumstances, dangerous circumstances. And then we got to deal with the fallout. You got to deal with what's happened to the people after their service. So these are important conversations to have. We have a government right now that's throwing money blindly at things instead of targeting it. And if they just throw more money at the military without planning, they're not going to make anything better. So everybody loses. Taxpayers lose, the people serving the military lose, and the veterans lose. All right, let's look at some other things. Speaking of stupid government, this one's really been getting me. I've been watching it. So this fellow named, and I'm probably going to ruin his name as well, Zion Haq. He's a Pakistani national. He came to Canada in 2019. You might have seen some of this online on a study permit, a foreign student. Fine. But it turns out he's also just a career activist. He's hardcore. He's crazy. He's joined all the protest groups over this last 5 years while he's been in Canada. He's been out with Extinction Rebellion and a bunch of those others. He's been arrested over 10 times. He's been convicted multiple times. Convicted of mischief charges. It's funny, people dismiss mischief unless it's Tamara Leach or some others. Suddenly then mischief is something worthy of doing time. Well, why is this gentleman here? Was he not here to get an education? If you want to protest and civil disobedience and get into active and all those things, that's fine. Do it at home. You're here to study, not disrupt the nation that is hosting you. And so it turns out, finally, he crossed the line enough. They're going to deport this clown. They said, that's enough. We're done with you. We're finished with you. We're sending you home. You're not what we wanted to see coming in, for foreign students. There's much better foreign students we could bring in to fill that void. Great. He was, some of the irony, he was supposed to be deported on April 22nd, which was Earth Day, as a supposed environmental kook. Canadian Border Services Agency was ready to get rid of him. It was all done. Last minute intervention. No, we're going to keep him here in Canada. And where did it come from? Literally the Trudeau cabinet. Yeah, the Trudeau government directly intervened and stopped the deportation of this arsehole. This jerk, this guy who's here breaking Canadian laws, disrupting Canadian infrastructure. Why? Why? We got so many other things you guys need to do as a government. Why did you step over, above and beyond to intervene and keep this man from being deported? It's not like he was being deported easily or without warning. It said that there's been 10 arrests. I'm sure that immigration warned him over and over, dude, you keep this up, we're going to get rid of you. Tim Burns, one of the commenters, says pandering. Well, pandering to who, though? I mean, who really is that thrilled to keep this moron here? Other students who are in and studying and spent a whole heck of a lot of money to attend Canadian post-secondary schools can't be happy when ass clowns like this guy give the rest of the students a bad name, when they shake everything up like that. So they're not happy with it. The rest of the citizens aren't happy with it. The people trying to commute to work when this idiot's blocking the roads isn't happy with it. Paradoxy says we're trying to pander to the eco-zealots. Yeah, I guess. But why? The eco-zealots at that level, we're talking people who have 5% support in the country at best. These are the nut bars. This is Extinction Rebellion. These are the ones that want to illegalize gasoline. I'm not talking figuratively. They want to illegalize gasoline. They're crazy. Why are we pandering to these nut bars? And we got enough domestic ones. We got enough homegrown idiots who want to shut things down. There he is there. Yeah, the cabinet overruled, and it was a judge. This went to court. This guy appealed this all the way through. Every judge, everything said, that's it. Get out of here, dude. We're done with you. You've pushed it too far. And then the government just said, nah, we're going to change our mind and get on with this. Like, wow. We wonder why there's problems. As Bink said, shut down mass immigration ASAP. Yeah, and you see, and here's where we start getting the tensions. Because, and I've had these debates on other podcasts where people say, we got to stop all immigration right now. No, we don't. No, we don't. In fact, we have to have a degree of immigration. We're built on it. We rely on it. We thrive on it. That's how we get our new labor. That's how we get our best professionals. That's how we develop this country. But we've got to do it right. It's similar to like I was talking about with throwing the money at the military. You still have to do it with a plan. You have to do it and make sure you have the resources to manage what you have. So we can't react in a too knee-jerk the other way, or we hurt ourselves and other immigrants and people as well. We got to find a balance. But yeah, when you do idiot things like keeping this twit in our country, when he clearly doesn't appreciate it, clearly doesn't deserve it, if we can't even get rid of this idiot, how on earth are we going to improve the quality of the people who are coming here? Like, hey, come on over, block our roads, smash our windows, break our laws. We're cool with that. Man, we can't get out of Trudeau's Canada soon enough. I tell you that. Let's talk about some nickels and dimes, some numbers coming out in Canada Post. Speaking of dinosaurs, right? Canada Post. They're losing money hand over fist. Big time. Of course they are. They're obsolete. Home letter delivery is done. I remember in the early 90s, it was the first strike where posties kind of lost a little. They used to strike, it seemed, when I grew up every couple of years, because they would always do it just before Christmas when everybody's desperate. And that's why we had postal carriers. My God, they made crazy money back in the 90s, relative to everybody else. I mean, they were flyer delivery people. Let's be serious about it. They'd work part-time hours. They walk with their Walkman on. Yeah, I'm going back some years, shorts, cigarette hanging out of the mouth back then. And you're putting letters in mailboxes. Massive pension, great hourly wages, massive vacation. Fine. But you know what? We don't need that anymore. And that strike in the 90s almost failed because of the fax machine. That started the beginning of the end of these guys. Wow, we can send documents without having to send a physical person to deliver it. And now with the internet, we're way down the line. The only potential way Canada Post could have stayed relevant was getting into the parcel delivery market, which has gotten huge now, but it doesn't matter. Amazon and the rest have blown them out of the water. A bloated, unionized government dinosaur of an institution can't compete. So yeah, they're losing hundreds of millions of dollars. And still, they're demanding more money, more bailouts. That's got to be enough, guys. It's got to be enough. People are saying, well, we got to have them. What about our northern communities that aren't served? Well, a couple of things. Maybe we could have some specialized delivery services that are subsidized going up there. But I get a little tired of that all the time, too. As I said, I spent 4 years in the Arctic. Yeah, I saw some of the prices. I mean, 10, 12 years ago, a jug of milk would be like $12 in the North Mart and things like that. But guess what? Living in those areas is a choice. When you're going to live in an isolated area where it's difficult to get product to you, the product is going to cost more. If you don't like that, you can freaking move. That's your choice. We got to quit saying that we owe everybody everything everywhere all the time. You're not entitled to having the same prices and services around you if you choose to live in Inuvik as if you choose to live in Calgary or Toronto or Saskatoon for that matter. I choose to live in an acreage outside of the city of Calgary. I like it, love it as a matter of fact. I also understand I won't have close access to big box grocery stores. I'm going to pay more for gasoline. I had to wait for Starlink to finally get good internet service, and I had to pay more to get that than people would pay in the city. But that's my choice. City doesn't owe me cheaper prices for those things that I chose to get in the rural area. But we get everything is an entitlement. That's what it comes down to. It's an entitlement. I'm entitled to this. I'm entitled to that. I remember that a few years ago, too, with an interview, and it wasn't done ironically, with a woman in Newfoundland and in a village that was dying, who was saying, I'm entitled to live here and have everything paid for the rest of my life. There's no resources there. There's no industry there. This kind of gets back almost to the First Nations reserve system I was talking about. Why? Why are we obligated to pay to have you stay on that rock? if you can't pay your bills, if there is not anything there to sustain it. We need harsh but realistic talk about that. So no, I'm not entitled to have you get delivery services to your isolated destination that you chose to live in. Subsidized. We don't have to subsidize that. The way that works is if there's an industry that's drawing people to isolated locations, they typically get paid more to work in those areas. If there's no industry in that area, people should leave. See, that's where things have to change. People should leave. If there isn't the industry there, if there isn't energy or mining or forestry or something, then they shouldn't be there, or they're just going to be dependents. What good is that? What good is that at all for you or for anybody else? You want to be on a desert island? Good for you. Save your money, live on a desert island. I'm not obligated to fund you on that desert island, though, or that little piece of heaven out in the bush. I can understand that too, but it doesn't mean you are entitled to the same services and products and prices as everybody else. We misbalance this country based on this whole concept of entitlement, on everybody has the right to everybody else's stuff. No, they don't. And that's that whole basis of equalization, which is stunting the proper development and interprovincial migration in this country. We're trying to falsely create an economy where it doesn't exist. Either way, I'll leave off on that. We covered a fair bit today. It was good to see Dave back again. Check out Freedom Honey with Mike. Make sure, get a subscription, guys. That's how we keep these things going. It's really important. So thanks for tuning in today. Share those links, by the way. That's how it helps as well. You know, whether you're listening on X or on Rumble or on YouTube, we appreciate it. Get that viewership up there. Keep the comments coming my way, guys. And yeah, tune in again next week at this time, and we'll do it all over with a new guest and a whole bunch of new issues.